Once upon a time, in a lovely city called Susa, there lived a sweet girl named Esther and her cousin Mordecai. They were part of a wonderful Jewish community, living happily together in Persia. Now, let me tell you something very special about Esther and Mordecai. They were cousins, but Mordecai was much older than Esther. Mordecai loved Esther very much. He took care of her, just like a father takes care of his own daughter. Meanwhile, in the grand palace of King Xerxes, there was a big celebration happening. King Xerxes threw a magnificent 7-day banquet to celebrate his reign as king. On the final day of the banquet, King Xerxes wanted to show everyone how beautiful his queen, Vashti, was. But guess what? Queen Vashti said no. She didn't want to come to the banquet. King Xerxes didn't know what to do. His advisors told him to get rid of Queen Vashti because she disobeyed the king. After Queen Vashti couldn't be queen anymore, King Xerxes had to find a new queen. The king's helpers had an idea. They said, "Let's find the most beautiful girls from all over the kingdom." So, girls from faraway places came to the palace to meet the king and be taken care of by Haggai, the palace eunuch, for 12 months. Esther was chosen because she was very pretty and kind-hearted too. Haggai, the palace eunuch, really liked Esther. He made sure she felt happy and safe in the palace. Esther and Haggai became good friends, and she was treated very well by him. Now, here's a special secret about Esther. She was a Jew, but nobody knew. Esther kept her secret safe, just like Mordecai told her to. When it was Esther's turn to meet the king, guess what? The king thought Esther was the most wonderful queen ever. One day, Mordecai heard something very bad. 2 angry men wanted to hurt King Xerxes. Mordecai hurried to tell Esther the news. Esther went straight to the king and told him everything. King Xerxes was very upset, but he was glad Esther told him. The king punished the 2 angry men, and everyone was safe again. Now, after all those things happened, something else started to happen in the palace. The king made a man named Haman very important. Everyone had to bow down to him. But Mordecai, he was different. He wouldn't bow down to Haman, even when everyone else did. The king's helpers asked Mordecai, "Why won't you do what the king says?" Mordecai told them, "I'm a Jew, and I can't bow down to anyone except God." Haman was very, very mad. He didn't just want to hurt Mordecai. He wanted to hurt all the Jews. Haman decided he would find a way to hurt Mordecai and all the Jewish people in the kingdom. "Haman, Your Majesty, there are some people who are different from everyone else in your kingdom." King Xerxes: "Oh? Tell me more, Haman." "Haman, they have their own ways, and they don't follow our laws. It's not good for you to let them stay, as they will not obey you. If you agree, please issue a decree to destroy them, and I'll give a lot of silver to your helpers for the royal treasury." King Xerxes: All right, Haman. Do what you think is best." The king believed Haman and gave him his special ring. So, the royal secretaries started to write something very important according to the king's command. They wrote down what Haman said in every language to every province, making sure everyone understood. Then, they sealed the letters with the king's special ring to show it was really important. The couriers took the letters to all the places in the kingdom, telling everyone the bad news. The letters said that all the Jewish people, big and small, had to be hurt on a special day. The letters were read by everyone, so they knew what was going to happen, and they were very sad. When Mordecai heard the bad news, he felt very, very sad. He put on sackcloth and sat in the dirt, crying loudly. He wanted to go to the king, but he couldn't because of what he was wearing. Everywhere, the Jewish people felt sad too. They cried and prayed for help. Esther's helpers came to her and told her about Mordecai, and she felt very sad when she heard about Mordecai's troubles. Esther called Hathach, one of the king's helpers, and asked him to find out what was wrong with Mordecai. So Hathach went to find Mordecai in the busy square outside the king's gate. Mordecai told Hathach everything that happened, how Haman wanted to hurt their people, the Jews. He gave Hathach a paper that showed what Haman planned to do to their people. Hathach hurried back to Esther and told her everything Mordecai had said. Esther thought for a moment and then told Hathach what to say to Mordecai. She said, "Tell Mordecai that there's a rule in the king's palace. If anyone goes to the king without being asked, they could be punished." Esther explained that it had been a long time since she had seen the king. Esther wrote a letter back to Mordecai, filled with bravery and determination. She told Mordecai to gather all the Jewish people in Susa and fast for 3 days. They were not to eat or drink, day or night, and Esther and her helpers would fast too. Esther promised to go to the king, even though it was against the law, and said, "If I perish, I perish." Mordecai read the letter carefully and did everything Esther asked him to do. On the 3rd day, Esther dressed in her most beautiful royal clothes. She stood bravely in front of the king's big hall, where he sat on his royal throne. When the king saw Queen Esther, he was very happy and held out his shiny gold scepter to her. Esther walked up to the king and touched the tip of the scepter, feeling relieved and happy. The king asked, "What do you want, Queen Esther? Just ask, and I'll give you anything, even half of my kingdom." Esther smiled and said, "Please come to a special banquet I've made for you and Haman today, if it pleases you, king." The king agreed happily, saying, "Bring Haman right away, so we can do what Esther wants." So the king and Haman came to the special banquet that Esther had made. They drank juice and ate yummy food, having a good time together. The king asked Esther, "What do you want, Queen Esther? Just tell me, and I'll give it to you, even half of my kingdom." Esther smiled and said, "Here's what I want, Your Majesty. If you and Haman like me, please come to another banquet I'll make tomorrow. Then I'll tell you what I want." Haman bragged to his friends and his wife about how important he was to the king. He said, "I'm the only one Queen Esther invited to the special banquet with the king, but nothing makes me happy when I see that Mordecai, the Jew, still sitting at the king's gate." His wife and friends said, "Put up a tall pole and ask the king to punish Mordecai." That night, the king couldn't sleep. He felt restless. So he asked his helpers to bring the book of stories about his kingdom. They found a story about Mordecai, who had saved the king from a very bad plan. His helpers said sadly, "No, Your Majesty, Mordecai didn't get anything." The king asked, "Who's outside?" Haman had just come to the palace to ask the king about punishing Mordecai. The king's attendants informing him about Haman's presence. Haman entered, feeling excited but nervous. The king asked Haman, "What should we do for someone I want to honor?" Haman thought, "Who could the king want to honor more than me?" Haman replied, "Your Majesty, if you want to honor someone, give them a robe you wore and a horse you rode." Put a special crown on the horse's head and let one of your best princes lead them. Let the prince dress the honored person in the robe and ride the horse through the city, shouting, "This is what the king does for someone he likes." King Xerxes liked the idea and said, "Haman, do what you said. Give Mordecai the Jew the robe and the horse and lead him through the city." Haman was surprised, but had to obey the king's command. So Haman gave Mordecai the robe and helped him onto the horse. They rode through the streets, and Haman shouted, "This is what the king does for someone he likes." Mordecai went back to his spot at the king's gate, feeling happy. Haman hurried home, feeling very sad and upset. He told his wife and friends everything that had happened to him. They warned him, "Since Mordecai is a Jew, you can't win against him. You're in big trouble." While they were still talking, the king's helpers came to take Haman to Queen Esther's banquet. The king and Haman came to Queen Esther's banquet. They drank juice and ate yummy food on the second day. Finally, the king asked, "Queen Esther, what do you want? I'll give you anything, even half of my kingdom." Queen Esther, looking serious, and said, "Your Majesty, if you like me, please save my life and my people. We've been told we'll be hurt and killed for no reason. If we were just going to be slaves, I wouldn't ask you to help." King Xerxes was very upset, and he asked, "Esther, who did this? Who wants to hurt you and your people?" And Queen Esther replied, "It's Haman, the mean man who wants to hurt us." Haman was very scared when he heard this. Haman knew he was in big trouble, so he begged Queen Esther for help. When King Xerxes was back in his own palace, his eunuch told him that Haman set up a tall pole by his house for Mordecai. The king commanded that Haman should be put on it. So they put Haman on the pole he made for Mordecai. On that very day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther Haman's big house and land. The king took his special ring back from Haman and gave it to Mordecai and Queen Esther, appointing Mordecai to take care of Haman's things. So Mordecai, who was a Jew, became very important. He was like the king's right-hand helper. As for Queen Esther, even though she was scared, she stood up to the bully who wanted to hurt her people. She knew that God would help her and give her wisdom. Esther showed us that being brave means facing our fears and standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. My dear, Queen Esther's story teaches us many wonderful things. She showed us that even when we're scared, we can be brave and stand up for what's right. Just like Esther trusted in God to help her, we can trust in Him too when we face difficult situations. And remember, being kind and standing up against bullies, like Esther did, is always the right thing to do.